What's up, guys? Thank you for tuning into this video. Today we're going to do a little bit of a compare car. I've assembled these two shit boxes, my 2000 Honda Accord EX and my roommate's 1998 Toyota Camry. And I'm going to try to answer two questions here today. Number one, if you were a buyer in 1999 and you were looking for a mid-size sedan and you've narrowed it down to these two, which one should you pick? And number two, you're a buyer in 2022 just looking for a cheap shit box and you found these two, which one should you pick? So let's go ahead and get started. Both of these cars have really high miles on them. They're both from a Japanese make that knows a thing or two about building a sturdy, reliable car. And they're both excellent examples of their class. The Camry here has 294,000 miles on it. And my Honda is a spring chicken with only 265,000 miles on it. And we're gonna look at the interiors, see how well they've held up, check out the exterior, take it for a drive, and see overall which one has survived the years and the use better. Now, with the exterior, neither of these cars are in very good shape on the exterior. They're both 50 footers at best, which is typical. You know, it's going to be really hard to find a car that has almost 300,000 miles on it that's lived outside its whole life that is in good exterior shape. The paint losing color here. There's some rash on the bumper. It's missing this mirror. And there's a bit of this A-pillar is a bit of a mess. It's a bit of an ouchie right here. And some rust on the fender here. This whole fender needs to be replaced. These headlights have been replaced and they look pretty good. But the paint overall, like the clear coat, has definitely held up a lot better than the Honda. These wheels are 14-inch wheels. I believe they're Solora wheels, but I'm not sure. And every single one of them is missing the center cap. Overall, I would say if this car didn't have this dent here and wasn't missing that mirror, the exterior wouldn't be in bad shape. It's definitely held up better than my Honda has. Speaking of my Honda, this car is definitely probably more straight than the Camry, but it definitely has, the paint is definitely worse off, you know. All the clear coat's gone, there's spots where it feels like sandpaper. The headlights are all hazed up. Bit of an ouchie right there. It's got a smattering of dings and dents. This wiper's all scratched up. Mirror's all faded. The one on the passenger side is black and not body color. The wheels have some curbing on them. Not quite advanced curbing, but they do have some curbing. Bumper's got some rash on it. More clear missing. Roof is a bit of a disaster. A bit of an ouchie right here. The garage at my old house. And this mirror, which is black and not body color. Well, that's fine, because it's a dark colored car. And this doesn't happen on the Camry. You can see where the paint is rubbed off the hood here. This is where the wiper arm hits the hood as I use the wipers, because the wiper transmission's all worn out. So, for condition, as far as how well these things have held up, on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give my shitbox probably a 5. Just because, maybe not. Probably a 4. Just because the paint's pretty much all gone. Things like that. It doesn't have the body damage that the Camry has, but that's not the car's fault. And the Camry I would give a 6. Just because the paint's in a lot better shape. And if it didn't have the fender damage and wasn't missing the passenger side mirror, it would honestly look not too bad. Let's move on to the exterior now. And now to assess the interior of these two cars. If you were a buyer looking for one of these things, brand new, and your only criteria was how nice is the interior, I would definitely go with the Camry. Because as far as I'm concerned, this thing just has more and higher quality materials, more soft touch materials. The seats are better, the cloth is better quality, the plastics are better quality, like the dash plastic is better quality, the seat fabric is nicer, the armrest is leather and not cloth, the door uppers are a nice soft touch, and they got this nice carpeting here. But from the perspective of this car being as used up as it is, this is one area where my shitbox up there definitely has the edge, because the interior in my Accord, it's definitely held up a lot better than this. Good example is this door handle, and Toyota door handles are definitely not their best feature. They put all their expertise and effort into making the engines last a long time, not the door handles. Also, this got this weather stripping hanging out right here. And there's another piece of weather stripping coming off over here. Also, this seat is, I don't know if you can hear that, the rail has snapped. As far as features go, these things are equipped identically. They both have power windows, locks, mirrors, sunroof, your basic radio, heat and air conditioning. The only real difference between them is that my Accord has a waggle stick, and this car does not. The AC in this thing works. The heat works. Everything in it works as far as I know. Got your mirror controls and everything over here. And really, it really hasn't held up too bad. It probably had a rougher life than my Honda did, because the interior in my Honda is in better shape, and this thing isn't a huge jump over my Honda. It's just slightly better in terms of materials. Now let's go check out my Honda. Now to assess the interior in my Accord, but first, it's giving the Camry over there crap about bad door handles, but this door is broken. Won't open. Doesn't open from the inside either. So, I just give them both crap for having bad door handles. But anyway, so the interior in this car is in better shape, but like I said, the materials are definitely a level down from the Camry. They're definitely not bad. Camry has better materials. Instead of leather or whatever it is in the Camry, you get carpet on the top of the door panel here, which definitely isn't bad. You get this nice soft rubbery material on the door armrest. The dashboard is, I would say the dashboard is a downgrade, but it has held up just fine. The steering wheel is definitely a lot worse. The steering wheel is not held up well, and it erodes on my hand as I drive, which is annoying. It's equipped exactly the same, and the heat and AC work well. Got your radio. This radio's aftermarket, of course. And the major difference between this and the Camry is my waggle stick. Which you could get a waggle stick in that, but they're hard to find, and we'll talk about that later. But overall, this interior is definitely in a lot better shape. There's no weather stripping hanging out or anything, and nothing's broken or missing, and it's actually pretty impressive how together the interior of this car is, given how old it is, how many miles it has, and it could have easily lived just as rough of a life as that thing, but somehow it hasn't, and I guess I should consider myself lucky. So armrest is a little stained. I need to get this thing like fully detailed, and I will do that. Both have a sunroof, and I do use the sunroof quite often. I think these things have exactly the same amount of equipment. I'm pretty sure they're identical. But anyway, let's move on to the engines now. So the engines in these things are very similar story. They're both front wheel drive, 4-cylinder. Both of them you could get a V6 as an option, but these are both the 4-cylinder. The Accord over here has a 2.3 liter 4-cylinder designated the F23. When it was new, it made 135 horsepower and I believe somewhere in the 140-ish range for torque. It is definitely no longer new, and sometimes it feels like it still makes that 135 horsepower, but most of the time it feels like it makes less than that. But it doesn't use or burn any oil. It doesn't leak any fluids, doesn't use any coolant or anything, and it generally does not have problems. And with 265,000 miles on it, even though I have had to do a lot of work to it, it's done a good job. But these 2.3s are pretty bulletproof as far as Honda engines go. Now the Camry over here, this I would say is a better engine. This is a 2.2 liter 4-cylinder that makes 133 horsepower and a torque figure that I cannot remember, but I have it written down, so I'll tell you later. And the reason why I say that this one is better is because when I drive this thing, it still feels like it makes the all 133 horsepower that it did when it was new 294,000 miles ago. As far as I know, this car doesn't use or burn any oil or anything like that, or any coolant. It has been through one transmission, and just like me, the owner of this car has had to do a lot to keep it running. But in 294,000 miles, you're going to spend a lot of money to keep it running. This is the way it is. Nothing you can do about it. And I would say that this has held up well as well. These are also pretty bulletproof engines. And one thing that I noticed right away in both of these cars is the sheer amount of space you have under the hood in these engine bays. And that makes sense because they cram a V6 in here. But it's just nuts how open it is in here. It does make it easy to work on though, which is nice. But that be the engines. And we'll talk more about these engines when I drive the cars. So, let's go ahead and real quickly talk about seat comfort, or backseat comfort rather, and then we'll get on the road. Assessing backseat comfort of my Honda, getting into the one back door that works. I have never ridden in this car as a passenger. I've only ever driven it. But now that I'm in here, this seat is all the way back. I have no leg room, but if the person in front of me was willing to move up a little bit, it would be okay. It's relatively comfortable. There's no lateral support at all, but that's fine. It is just fine back here. There is a nice rip though, which is a shame, because otherwise this back seat would be in really good shape. Get a nice scenic view of the dash. And that is the back seat of my Accord. Let's go check out the back seat of my Camry. The Camry. Now for the Camry. Again, just like in materials, it has a slight edge over my Honda. It's just everything is just a little bit nicer. The door, the carpeting, the armrest. The cloth material that Toyota used in this area, I think is brilliant. You got some broken cup holders back here in the center armrest. My Accord also has a center armrest. The armrest of my Accord has cup holders in the armrest. And the seat is ever so slightly more comfortable. Also, there's more knee room for me, because this seat is all the way back, but I have about an inch of knee room. Whereas in my Honda, I don't. Also, from back here, you can really see how messed up this seat is. But backseat comfort in both of these is acceptable. The Camry is definitely has it beat. Not by much, by just a little bit. Just this, I just love this seat material. This cloth just feels so nice. The materials Toyota was using in this era were top notch. Now, talk about trunk space. Unfortunately, I cannot show you the trunks in these cars because the trunk in this car is full of stuff. But they both hold exactly 14.1 cubic feet of cargo. And they both have a latch just like this to get into the trunk and the fuel door. Now, let us drive. All right, we're driving. First, we're driving my shitbox, my 2000 Honda Accord. Quick side note before I get into how this thing drives. This window broke literally while I was driving to the parking lot to film this video. This window decided it was done with life. I went to roll it down, and it rolled down about 80% of the way and then got stuck, and then I tried to roll it back up and it wouldn't go up. And then I tried to roll it up while playing with the switch, and something broke inside the window and fell into the door, and now the window rolls up and down without the aid of the pesky window motor. So I'm gonna have to get that fixed at some point, and I'll do that. But anyway, that aside, so I've owned this car for almost 2 years now, and in those almost 2 years, I put 48,000 miles on it. So I am definitely an authority on how this car drives, and the short answer is that it drives okay. It drives like an old shitbox, just like you'd expect. It's very slow, obviously. It wasn't fast from the factory. 135 horsepower, 145 foot-pounds of torque. From the factory, it did 0 to 60 in 9 seconds, which is acceptable. And some days it feels like it'll do that. Some days it feels like it does 0 to 60 in 9 minutes. The engine doesn't rev super well. It's not super eager to rev, and the red line is 6250. It's not super torquey at low RPM. It starts to make usable power around like 2800 RPM. So if you actually want to get any actual acceleration out of it, you're shifting around 4,000. It's a little loud, but not too bad. Definitely rattles a good bit. I keep saying the transmission, I think, is one of the strong suits of this car, and that's been a strong suit of every Honda that I've ever driven. It's a 5-speed auto, and other than the fact that the gear 5-speed manual, and other than the fact that the gearing is really tall, and the space between first and second is larger than the space between fourth and fifth, which is ridiculous. It's excellent. It's a delightful manual transmission to use. The clutch is easy. The shift action is brilliant. It's relatively easy to rev match, especially if you're rev matching into like third or fourth. It's a little bit more difficult to rev match into second. But overall, excellent. And the manuals of these things don't eat transmissions like the automatics do. And speaking of the automatics, we should talk about the V6 Accord. And the reason why I bring that up in relation to the automatic is because you couldn't get a manual in a V6 in this generation of the Accord. You could in the next generation, which the 7th generation V6 stick shift Accord has been on my short list of cars I've wanted to buy for a while now, but not in this generation. And that's kind of a shame, because the V6 with the automatic is, the transmission's just a grenade that'll go off at some point. And they go out constantly. It's not enough transmission for that car. And it's just unfortunate that you couldn't get a stick shift, because I'm sure that engine's great. I'm sure a V6 stick shift of this generation would be excellent. Talk about handling. It doesn't handle bad. The handling is acceptable, to be honest with you. The ride is actually relatively controlled, especially given how many miles are on this thing and how worn out it is. There is a clunk coming from the front end. It happens when the suspension is on rebound, not compression. And I have no idea what that is. But the front end does clunk sometimes. Yeah, really not that much more to say about it. I talk about fuel economy. That's important. This thing, the whole time I've owned it, has gotten between 26 and 30 miles per gallon city, and probably a similar number on the highway. It doesn't do that great on the highway, just because the engine's underpowered and you have to work it a lot to go highway speeds. And it'll probably do 35 if I drive slow. But fuel economy is definitely where this has the Camry edged out. And that's probably due to the waggle stick, but could also due to the engine being more efficient. And I think that's going to do it for the driving impressions of my shitbox. I have done a full review of this car. If you want to know a little bit more about how it drives, you can go check that out. But let's move on to the Camry and see how that drives. Alrighty, now we are in the Camry. Quick side note for this car as well. The little button or little stopper that keeps the seatbelt buckle from falling all the way to the floor is gone. So the seatbelt buckle falls all the way to the floor, and that drives me bonkers. But anyway, getting into the driving impressions of this car, the first thing I noticed in this car compared to my Accord is that it is definitely a lot floatier. The suspension is definitely a lot more worn out in this thing. It does rattle quite a bit less. Also, there's it's definitely a clunking noise coming from the back right somewhere, and I'm not sure what that is. It is more comfortable in here. These seats are more comfortable. It feels more open in here. And I'm not sure if that's just the color, or if that's just because my Accord has more tint, or what the deal is there. But for some reason, it feels more airy in here. I wish I had a waggle stick. You may be able to tell once we accelerate here, but for whatever reason, this transmission shifts really firmly into second gear. And I'm not sure why. The owner doesn't know why. It's been doing that for years, and it hasn't gone out. So it's a 4-speed auto, and it's a ASIN transmission, and ASIN is a subsidiary of Toyota. And generally, these things hold up really well, but this one's on its second transmission. So who knows? I'm not sure what happened. Maybe someone did a bunch of brake stands, or was constantly bumping it in and out of overdrive or something like that. Right now, this car has 294,136 miles on it. And like I said before, when I was talking about the engine, it feels like it still makes the 133 horsepower it made when it was new. It's not fast. From the factory, this was even slower than my Accord. My Accord did 0 to 60 in 9 seconds, and this thing did 0 to 60 in 10.6 seconds. But 250,000 miles later, this is the car that feels more powerful. When it was new, it made 133 horsepower and 147 foot-pounds of torque. I told you I would tell you how much torque it makes. And generally, it still feels like it makes those numbers. And the owner tells me that it feels powerful like that, all the time, even when it's really hot out. Which is good. Because my Accord, when it's really hot out, it feels lethargic. talk about handling real quick, because that's one area that these cars do differ quite a bit. I said that the ride in my Accord was pretty well controlled. That is not the case in this car. The suspension in this thing is worn out. It is floaty. It is like driving on an angry sea. There is a lot of body roll. It wallows and moves around all over the place. My Accord definitely has better steering. The steering in my Accord, for what it is, really isn't too bad. The steering in this is a disaster. It's all over the place. The suspension in this thing's just worn out. And in 294,000 miles, just the way it is, it's what happens. It definitely does ride well. It's definitely a comfortable car to drive. But it is very wallowy. As far as revs go, they both redline at 6 1/4. And I've never driven one of these with a waggle stick, so I can't really tell you how it revs. But I imagine they rev the same. They're both very similar displacement, very similar power. They both make their power very similar RPM. Speaking of the waggle stick, let's talk about the V6 version of the Camry. Now, these cars in both 4-cylinder and V6 form both make pretty much the exact same amount of power. You know, the 4-cylinders make 135 for the Honda, 133 for this, 145 torque for the Honda, 147 for this. You know, that averages out to exactly the same. The V6s are the same story. The V6 in the Honda makes 200 horsepower and 195 foot-pounds of torque. The V6 in this makes 194 horsepower and 209 foot-pounds of torque. And they're both 3-liter. Now, the big difference between this car and the Accord when it comes to the V6 is that you can get this with a V6 and a 5-speed. And I want one because I really like this body style of the Camry. I really like these interiors. And a V6 with a 5-speed I think would be really fun. And like I said, in my Accord, you can't get my generation of the Accord with a V6 and a stick shift. But you can get the 7th generation Accord with a V6 and a stick shift, and that is capable of doing 0 to 60 in 5.9 seconds, which is the quickness. Both of these cars currently have a check engine light on. I'm not sure what the engine light is on, what's throwing the code in this car, but this car is registered in one of the 146 counties in this state that does not require emissions. So this engine light is permanent and it doesn't matter. The engine light in my Accord, however, is being tripped by a vehicle speed sensor, and I need to get that fixed because my Accord is registered in Cobb County, which does require emissions, which is real unfortunate. This is not an evap code or anything. It's just a stupid dummy code. And with that, I think that's going to do it for this video. I appreciate you guys tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this video, me comparing these two shit boxes. No, that's not going to do it for this video. I should answer the questions that I asked in the beginning. If I were someone buying one of these things brand new, I would go for the Camry. And the main reason for that is for that V6 in manual transmission that I was telling you about. And the Honda doesn't offer that. And I overall like the interior of the Camry more. I like the layout of it more. I like the materials better. And the Camry, I think, is the one that looks nicer. They both look very bland. They both look like nothing. But I think the Camry does a better job of looking like nothing than my Accord does. Now, to answer the question of, as a buyer in 2022, just looking for a shitbox, which one of these would I buy? And honestly, it's a toss-up. Because they both do the same thing. They're both really reliable. They'll both last you a long time. They'll both be cheap to maintain and cheap to own and cheap to fix, and you'll be able to find parts for them, things of that nature. So I should let the answer to that question be, which one did I buy? And I bought the Accord, so I guess ultimately that's the answer. And with that being said, that is now actually the end of this video. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and let me know what you thought of this video about the comments. Let me know which one of these two cars that you would pick, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.